Greetings and welcome back. It's your host, Gabe Morales. Just a quick update. I heard from a little birdie that something big might be going down in the City of Angels. But, as I've said many times, I try very hard in my work not to jeopardize any current cases or get any cops more pissed off at me than they already are. Some don't think that I should be talking about any of this, and others have given me big kudos for my work, for my videos. So just to let you know, a major bust just went down involving longtime Emero Salvatore Cricnania from Rancho San Pedro. Over a dozen people were arrested yesterday, Tuesday, October 7th, 2025, on charges of selling drugs, possession of illegal weapons, and collecting protection money in the harbor area where RSP is located, and other crimes. Cook is currently housed at Calipatria. California State Prison Centinela is located in Imperial County, not far from the Mexican border. It is approximately 20 miles away from the cities of Imperial and El Centro, where I did a short 1-month special duty tracking on radar what would later become known as smart bombs during the Gulf War. But at the time I helped test them, they were not very accurate, so we called them dumb bombs. Centinela is located on approximately 2,000 acres, consisting of a level 4 GP yard, 2 level 3 GP yards, and 1 level 3 sensitive needs yards, although I thought they were doing away with those and reintegrating all SNYs with general population. If you just got out of Centinela, let me know if that is true. As of 2020, Centinela was incarcerating people at approximately 142% above capacity design. But I think that number has been reduced in the last few years. I believe Hector Bravo from that prison guard's dad worked at the facility when he first started his career. Hector has quite the sense of humor and has some good stories on his show. He has also spoken on my channel as well as several other channels like Vlad TV about his experiences working at Centinela. As far as any beef between me and Hector that a few people have asked me about, we're all good as far as I know. We don't always agree on everything, but we do agree on a lot of things. He has his views and I have mine, but I think there is mutual respect. Some people may disagree with me and find my content to be questionable, but I always try to be accurate. And I always try to make it clear if something is just my opinion and not stated as being facts. Our own personal experiences often shape our views of the world and of corrections. I grew up in Yakima, Seattle, was a non-combat Marine pre-Gulf War in the Tactical Air Command Center, where there was often more brass than enlisted. I served 2 years at 29 Palms, 1 at Camp Pendleton, where I was pulled for that El Centro special assignment, and my final year, I served in Okinawa, where I also did a 2-month stint in South Korea for Operation Team Spirit. Hector is from Brole, in the Imperial Valley, where Centinela Prison is located. He did Army combat duty overseas, self-admits that he had post-traumatic stress disorder and a drinking problem, but was able to get sober. He talks about this often on his shows. We all have our demons. He worked in a different time period in CDC than me. He came after me, and I think would agree things have gone downhill in that organization and violence has gone up in recent years. Much of that chalked up to new policies of administrators. I was lucky that I had a very strong and fair boss working under Folsom Warden Borg. Even most convicts respected him. When I was working at New Folsom from 1987 to 93, we didn't have pepper spray issued to us or some of the things they have available today. We had side-handled batons, which many officers did not carry. We had radios and alarms, which many also did not carry. You had to have good communication skills at that time, or you could get your ass kicked. We had Mini 14s for the yard and HK9s for inside the units, if we had to use them. Tasers were available, but only for lieutenants or acting lieutenant sergeants who were authorized to use those. Hector started off as a CO and became a sergeant, later a lieutenant. After moving back to my home state of Washington, I started off as an officer at the King County Jail, then transferred into the classification section, and many years later did a short stint as lieutenant at an ICE processing center in Tacoma. Like I said, we're different people, served in different places, and had different roles. When it comes to the MANF, Aryan Brotherhood, or Black Guerrilla family, I think I have above average knowledge, having dealt with many of them and having read hundreds of debriefs, which can sometimes contradict what others say. I'm always learning, looking at the big picture. I understand how manipulative some of these guys can be, but I try to get a consensus and try not to let my biases get the best of me. I was schooled by some of the best gang investigators in the business, but do occasionally make mistakes. For instance, in one of my videos, somebody pointed out that William Flakovic, who I became well aware of way back when he had a K number, when he was a Nuestra Raza messenger, and who many years later I interviewed for a couple of videos on this channel, communicated with many times via email, and spoke directly with on the phone several times before he fell off again, was from Barrio Más Loco, not Barrio Más Chingón in Milpitas, just out of San Jose. We talked at length many times about his life, and I've documented thousands of gangsters from hundreds of other gangs. But I admit I got that mixed up. Small error on my part, I thought. But this particular individual contested my entire career and expert experience due to that single error. Híjole, I forgot how petty some people can be. I don't know everything, but I do know one thing. I ain't got no R on my jacket, but I do occasionally make mistakes. So I want to clarify something about my last video that one of my listeners, who appears to be a very credible source, corrected me and said that Richie Boy, aka RB, in the phone call I played, and Richard Cheeks Buchanan are two different individuals. At the beginning of the call, when they talk about the shooters or hit team, Richie Boy and Travieso are mentioned. And he said that when they're referring to Richie Boy, they're referring to the Richie Boy from San Bernardino, aka Verdugo Little Counts gang. When the old man Stony Glass speaks of his cellie at the time, Blanco, who was at Salinas Valley State Prison at the time, states that Travieso was very shaky. This source, a validated Emero, stated that he was the one that got RB his blessings to function at Calipatria. And Richie Boy was initially selected to do the Pegada because he was very well oriented with the format of that pinta, but he made excuses, as discussed in the phone call, and did not follow through. Evidently, that is when Spider and Stomper picked up the hit and suffered greatly for it, as explained in the video. I think I had the respect of most inmates and had very few problems. When I was at New Folsom, they mostly took out their anger and violence on each other. I totally agree with Hector. If any one race or clica or group gets too many numbers, they will often turn their anger on the prison cops. Understand that there was a major incident between Crips and Sureños in the summer of 2008. Supposedly over the use of a pull-up bar, as well as some issues in the dining rooms and gyms that were being used at the time for overflow bunk housing. And after some of these events in 2008, staff assaults occurred. Understand that a Crip who recently transferred in from the Bay complained about the Sureños having more rec areas, even though there were more Sureños than blacks. And there were other issues at the facility. Big O from Lennox wanted to declare war on the blacks, but somebody dropped a kite on him and he was taken off the yard. It didn't matter. A couple of his soldados got off on blacks anyways. I had M.A. shot caller Arthur Turi Estrada from Cuca, Rancho Cucamonga at New Folsom segregation in 1988. Tootie ran the show for parts of Centinela for many years. I lived in Rancho Cucamonga for a short time period when I left King County Jail around 1999 and was working Southern California group homes. My office was at the Eddie Lee Azusa facility, and I would do gang assessments for my boss, Jose Barry Gallegos, who was featured in a video once with my friend Chris Blatchford of Fox 11 News. Anyways, I know that area very well and have many family and friends out there still. My wife's grandma, rest in peace, was born in Cucamonga when it was mostly just dirt roads, except for the Arrow Highway, the famous Route 66. When my wife and I first met, the area between Ontario and San Bernardino, except for the old part of Cuca and Old Fontana, was mostly vineyards and wineries. Now most of those are gone, and the grape fields are full of homes and businesses. A good book on that area and the growing gang activity that blew up during the 1980s to date is Inland Empire Gangs by Todd DePalma and Andy Eways, co-author of our book on 18th Street, Mara Salvatrucha, and Sureños, that may be out of print now, but you might be able to find a good used copy online. Tootie was later housed at Tehachapi Shoe 4A 7A in 2004 to 2005. Then I think was transferred to Corcoran Shoe when the 2008 incident occurred. As I stated, he continued to control parts of Centinela for many years while he was housed at Corcoran. I've covered some of the Mexican Mafia beefs at Pelican Bay in a previous video, but don't know if I explained that the main beef at Corcoran Shoe between the MA was between Tootie and Artie Guzman from King Cobras. Tootie spoke fluent Nahuatl, studied Aztec Mayan culture and history, and had a lot of power and had a large drug network. In fact, he is one of the few individuals in the recent history of the MA who was put on disregard and allowed to come back. And I believe is still functioning at Pelican Bay as we speak. Gangster from the Avenues is another example that comes to mind, who is presently at Kern Valley State Prison. All of these guys often have camaradas or Mexican Mafia associates working for them on other yards. And I believe that Pajaro, aka Bird from Eastside Longo, was one of Tootie's reps at Centinela. Pajaro ran a tight ship, like Tootie, and had a rule not to engage in the cops unless seriously provoked. In that case, all Sureños are obligated to join in when fighting the Huras, or the Blacks, or any other group that they may have a confrontation with. I understand that issues at Centinela reached the breaking point, in particular after one old guard who was perceived as singling out the Sureños and allegedly pepper sprayed a younger Sureño, which got all of the Sureños pissed off, and they attacked that old guard. When the alarm sounded and staff responded, the Sureños attacked some of those staff as well. I understand that another issue at Centinela around 2011, as I stated, Pajaro was working for Tootie, as was Drugsy from the harbor area. I understand that Drugsy was on D Yard but transferred to B Yard, where he was kept abreast of what was happening on the yard by Shady, who became his cellie. They're also working with Speedy from Hawaiian Gardens, who was Pastahuila, and I believe that the word from Bird was that Drugsy was given authority per Tootie to take charge of the yard. Evidently, Speedy was not happy with this directive and started rallying his troops. I heard that Creeper and Drugsy then aligned themselves and badmouthed Speedy as stealing from Laeme, basically taking some of Tootie's money and turning it over to his homeboy from Hawaiian Gardens instead of to the big homie. I guess there was another issue where Clever from Pasadena Latin Kings and Drugsy challenged a couple of Eastside Longo Crips who were playing diss rap about Eastside Longueros, Sureños from the area. When the doors popped open, a Crip went over Speedy from Warren Gardens and complained about his side, the Sureños, specifically Drugsy, talking a lot of masa. Like I said, Speedy didn't like Drugsy taking charge of what he considered to be his yard and his operations, and tried to get rid of Drugsy. But Drugsy wasn't dumb, so made countermeasures against Speedy. So basically, you had two crews battling for control of the yard. These kinds of movidas happen all the time in all California pintas, and Centinela was no different. More of the details on those incidents are covered by former NF Captain John Boxer Mendoza on his channel, as well as being discussed on other channels. As I discussed at the beginning of this video, violence within CDC has steadily risen over the past few years. November 14, 2022, Sureño inmate Juan Serrano and Jose, aka Little Boy / Cashy Perez from MS Leeward Locals in LA, attacked William Quintero, who died after being shanked to death at the prison. On June 27, 2023, staff responded when inmate Taylor Fatai allegedly attacked inmate Antonio Harris, who sustained multiple fatal stab wounds. Harris was from Riverside County on a burg charge, as well as possession of a firearm by a felon, and second-degree robbery. In addition, he received gang enhancement sentencing for being a member of a street gang in commission of a serious felony. Fatai was from LA County and sentenced to 50 years to life without the possibility of parole for first-degree murder, with an additional enhancement for being a felon in possession of a firearm. I do not know if Fatai was a gang member, but these guys involved in these types of incidents often are. On January 7, 2024, two Sureños, Rigoberto Estrada and David Veloz, attacked and killed Enrique Salceda on the rec yard. Smoke grenades and pepper spray were utilized by staff, but it was too late, as Salcedo was already dead. Former Los Angeles gang shot caller Ezekiel Wicked Romo was stabbed to death in Centinela on July 21st, 2024. Inmates Christian Moreno, Johnny Garcia, and Christian Hernandez were accused of shanking him. Romo was from Blythe Street, a Sereno gang in Panorama City located in the San Fernando Valley, the same area that inmate shot caller Michael Mosca Torres was from, who was killed on July 6, 2023 at New Folsom Prison. I do not know if those two deaths are connected. That is a possibility because when one guy falls, often his entire network does, and there's a power struggle over their old turf. Romo had been at Centinela since August 2023 after being sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for first-degree murder and conspiracy to murder others. According to the LA Times, Romo was responsible for at least 8 deaths after he ordered members of his gang to turn on one another, removing drug addicts, informants, rivals, and other people who he considered dead weight from the gang's ranks. This is often referred to as house cleaning. Now, some people state that Romo was just a camarada, that he was not made. But I heard that he was a carnal, and that his sponsors were Jose Cartoon Loza, Frank Playboy Fernandez, and Raul Güero Smooth Garcia, who were both fied emeros. So I'm not sure why people would say he was not a carnal, other than maybe the process under which he was made was put into question, like some of the guys made by the sole palabra of old man Rube Soto in the BOP. Please chime in the comments section if you have any opinions you can back up with some evidence on that. But it's pretty much the consensus that many of the younger homies felt that Wicked was overbearing, an abusive boss who ordered hits on members of his own gang for very petty things, like getting an unsanctioned Vice Street tattoo, or getting high when they're supposed to be on the job, and not returning his phone calls, even when they had good excuses. Ultimately, he fell and was sentenced for those murders. But, as in many cases, the person who was the prayer became the prey. His alleged attackers were all convicted out of LA County and were Soreños. But unlike the Emiliano Zapata Lopez murder at Calipatria, I do not know who authorized his murder. Maybe some of you have the 411 on that too. In addition to MMA infighting, Soreños on Soreños, Crips and Bloods would sometimes fight at Centinela and other joints. Former convict Damian Porter discusses one such event that occurred in 2020 or 2021 on Seayard and Centinela between the Crips and Bloods. Notorious 8-tray gangster Crip Cody Monster Scott, who later changed his name to Sanika Shakur, was housed in Centinela for a while before he was transferred out, released on parole, and later found dead of an apparent stroke in Oceanside, California in June of 2021. Crips gang member Damian Football Williams also did time at Centinela. I understand that he was a 7-1 Hustler Crip, which are part of the 8-tray gangsters umbrella. He was one of several attackers of Red Driver Reginald Denny at the corner of the riot flare-up on Florence and Normandy in 1992 during the Rodney King riots. Williams was incarcerated on that case, but released and reincarcerated after a murder case in 2000 when I believe he did his time at Centinela. Longtime MMA member Ronnie Ayala from San Diego was on San Quentin's death row for many years, but was kicked out after the death penalty was halted by Governor Gavin Newsom in 2019, and he landed on Centinela's Sea Yard. Jose Gilbert Joker Gonzalez from Hazard was convicted of being the shooter in the death of Ana Lizarraga and is presently housed at Centinela. I had Joker on my yard in New Folsom shortly before his parole on April 27, 1992. Lizarraga was killed barely 2 weeks later on May 13, 1992. So, as I discussed many times before, she had a small role in American Me and was also featured on director Edward James Olmos' documentary Lives in Hazard. I've heard some say that her death had nothing to do with the movie, but it was common knowledge in the area for many years that she was a gang prevention worker and was giving info to the cops about local drug dealers, which LMA considered to be interfering with their business. The other 2 individuals killed who were advisors to that movie, Charlie Brown Manriquez and Manuel Luna, also had issues well before that movie came out, but were murdered not long after it was released. So I strongly believe that it was the final straw, and it was decided that they had to be eliminated. In other words, it was not the only factor, but it was a factor. Danny Boy Pena is also from Hazard. He was sent to the Bay in the late 1980s after he and Angel Stump Valencia killed Mo Farrell at Old Folsom back in the mid 1980s. Both were pulled back to New Folsom in the early 1990s when I had them in the VCU A5. I was working the gun one day when Danny Boy got news that he was validated, and all the camaradas and emeros had a big celebration out on the yard like he was just anointed royalty after he was sent back to the Bay with Jaco Padilla from Azusa, who had a little war with Rafael Cisco Munoz, the individual mentioned by Tonito in the last video, when he was trying to muscle in on some of Cisco's territory. Jaco also beefed with Ralph Perico Rocha, depicted on the cover of my Mexican Mafia book. Both Padilla and Pina were involved in several business ventures together. One of Jocko's alleged transactions was to purchase a couple of Presa Canario dogs from Aryan Brotherhood members Dale Desperado Bretches and Paul Cornfred Schneider to help guard his drug businesses. Believe it or not, Pina was also involved in the stock market. Some of these guys are actually pretty sharp, and some are dumber than a bag of rocks. Mark Quiroz from Colton, who is well respected, conducted a well publicized interview not long ago in his house at Centinela. He talked about his time in the SHU and his personal history. Now, usually La MA frowns on media interviews, but he didn't talk about any details that might get him or others into trouble. He mostly talked about the criminal justice system not being very effective in deterring youth and often making them worse. He talks about how he survived solitary confinement and how the SHU hunger strikes were not quite what supporters in media releases made it sound like. According to him and others, many hid food like peanut butter and crackers in their cells, so they ate a little. They just told authorities they were refusing to eat. In other words, would not take a food tray given to them or eat their 3 meals a day. Other people have said the same thing in other media outlets, so again, I don't think he really broke the long-time rule about the code of silence. Another quick update for you guys. In a federal court case last week, Jose Landa Rodriguez, aka Fox from South Dos, who I knew as Jose Tapia when I had him at New Folsom Violence Control Unit, A Section, Cell 110, right by the upper door between A Section and B Section in the early 1990s, when he was just a camarada, pled no contest about a week ago in L.A. Superior Court to making criminal threats and was sentenced to time served. In 2013, Fox was accused of trying to establish a meth pipeline from his home state in western Mexico with La Familia Michoacana. At the time, he was making deals with Ralph Perico Rocha, who had just been released from the feds about 5 years earlier and was making major moves out on the calles. But Fox became suspicious that Perico was working for authorities, which he was, and Fox told the cartel to stay away from him. They were all indicted anyways, and Perico dropped out after being shot at by 18th Street and other issues. LA County prosecutors had charged that Fox was locked in a power struggle with Tudia Estrada over some CDC yards. Fox allegedly received 1/3 cut of drug cells within the LA County jail system at the time, working with such gangs as MS, leading prosecutors to dub their investigation Operation Dirty Thirds. As I stated, Rube co-signed on several MS being made MA, as recommended under Fox. But later, Rube's blessings came into question and politics came to play. You see, Mike Boo Moreno has long had a hand in the TJ-MA connection, as did others, and he did not like Fox making so many movidas with MS in the Familia Michoacana. There was also problems when the Familia Michoacana and the Caballeros Templarios split when Tuta broke off. Fox also supported Evo from Ventura County, who was killed down in Baja not long ago. With all these problems, Fox was put on freeze, put on the shelf, under investigation, however you want to put it. After Fox has pled guilty, he'll be deported, but he's come back many times before. I don't know if he'll ever cross again over into Califas. He's had some problems in that state, but may have done okay in the BOP, where he was making major moves with guys like Bobby Romero from Norwalk. Never say never, like as I mentioned with Tootie and with Gangster. There's a reason why they call him Fox, and I think Misled Loyalty Rob de Sinaloa would agree. As I've stated several times during this video, Centinela can be a very violent place. I heard a rumor that there were approximately 32 stabbings in just 2 weeks on Sea Yard around 2008 or 2009. But while there have been some very brutal and tragic events at the facility, there are also a lot of positive staff working there and incarcerated individuals who have changed their lives or are working on changing it.
30 incarcerated men at Centinela State Prison graduated today after training for jobs that they could qualify for once they're out of prison. Now they receive their apprenticeships and job certifications after completing training provided by the California prison industry known as CalPIA. Or CalPIA. The former graduate, who was in prison for more than 10 years, was with one of the first incarcerated groups to receive their optician certifications. He says the program helped him become the person he is right now.
Inside of prison, I was one of the people who participated in those programs. And those programs actually impacted my life tremendously because it gave me job skills that I could use when I return to society. A lot of times people in prison don't think that the things that they do inside will have an impact when they're released. For me, it was.
Tony Curtis is now a co-founder of a construction company and senior pastor at a local church. The program provides job training to nearly 6,000 incarcerated individuals, so when they're out of prison, they can add their certification to their resume.
It's never too late to change for the better. I know that I'm not perfect. I'm a sinner, but I try to work on my own issues, like trying not to get upset sometimes over all this YouTube stuff. I don't want it totally controlling my life and be addicted to it, but I will continue to finish off this California prison series, then take a little benefit for my mind, body, and soul. And with that, this has been Gabe Morales signing off for Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians.